there's a lot of teams that need to be working together. For example, within supply chain, if you want to do any automation for planning or for inventory, it will impact planning, transport, customer service. It will impact the entire supply chain. So it's about bringing all those teams together, having a representative on those calls, and being very vocal on what do we need in order to achieve that. And then make someone accountable for collecting that data or making people work together.
Welcome to Chain Reaction, the podcast for the supply chain and logistics industry. If you enjoy this conversation, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss an episode.
Welcome back to the Chain Reaction podcast. Is 2026 now. I'm Michael Ostroumov, a CEO of Flux Logistics Marketplace. This is the channel brought to you by Flux as a way to engage with logistics and supply chain professionals to explore the ideas, the people, the experiences that are shaping the industry. Before we get started though, please subscribe to the channel. It really will help us to grow and reach more people that can benefit from these conversations. So today I'm joined by Rosana Fuentes, an implementation consultant at Baxter Planning. Rosana works with global organizations that deliver supply chain solutions, leading automation and transformation initiatives. Rosana, welcome. Great to have you here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you, Michael, for having me.
Pleasure. I love to start the kind of the conversation with just trying to get a bit of a human flavor of understanding the journey behind the expertise. So many people, and actually majority, funnily enough, don't plan to kind of get into logistics, and it often happens by accident. So I'd love to hear your story. How did you find your way into supply chain?
I believe it was also a little bit by accident. I had a couple of work experiences while I was studying at university, and they were both within logistics and supply chain. So I found that then the career path that I will follow after once I graduated will be in logistics. I did not intend it fully to be within the entire supply chain, but it happened a little bit by accident, as you mentioned. I started at a cosmetic manufacturer, so I was very passionate about how products are built from scoping until you deliver that to the end customer, and also by all the processes that happen in between. So following that, I decided to focus more on projects, not only to streamline processes, but also to find ways of bringing teams together to aim for an end solution that will help them all to be better at what they do.
In what you do, kind of, because we talked about the projects that you run, especially currently in your consultancy, and there's a lot around kind of the supply chain automation, and automation is kind of is these days becoming a quite a wider term. So previously it was mostly about, I don't know, automated warehousing or automated manufacturing kind of production, but today, especially with the development of tech and robotics, it becomes wider, and from the performance, sorry, from the organizational and process point of view. So could you describe a little bit more about kind of the typical projects, the typical areas that you look at, and what kind of automation in a wider sense means for you?
So at the moment, I'm looking essentially after implementing the software that we have at Baxter Planning, which are forecasting tools for service parts planning. So it's pretty much working with different companies, look at their supply chain network on how the supply and distribute all their parts within their network, and how their warehouses interact with different ERPs, different vendors, and so on, in order to have everything fed into a system that it will give the user all the suggestions in terms of how's that forecast based on their historical data, how much do they have in stock in all across all their network, also to improve visibility. Often in previously working at other companies, there's many, in most scenarios, all the information that is held in the ERPs is very manual. So different teams have to input that information, and often those flows are too manual to rely on the data. So with these scenarios, you are very much aware of all the data that you have and is put into a system, and then will create some forecasting suggestions, purchase suggestions, and rebalancing suggestions of the stock across your network. So it's one of those tools that I'm focusing in particular. There's also a lot of different tools as well in the market in terms of how to follow the all the stock or the products that you have, as in integrating different ERPs, like your ERP, maybe your 3PL, your manufacturer, and then in there being able to see where that product is at every stage, instead of having to liaise with different emails or having to have like a more manual and personal point of contact. You will have that automated at, sometimes we say live, but it often takes a couple of hours for the system to communicate to each other, so you can see on screen what's happening with your orders, and then for you to be able to trigger different actions, whether you want to cancel, whether you want to do something different. But instead of having to rely on someone doing all those actions in different within different companies, you will have everything in one system that then will send that information to the different parts.
Right. I know, very interesting, and this is kind of exactly what is Seeds as kind of main ethos, and in terms of what Flux does is exactly that: is how can we integrate multiple systems, multiple partners, buyers and suppliers, and a downstream and logistics partners, so to give the ideally instant and real time visibility of what's happening. But speaking of automation, because this is interesting, and I remember kind of in my consulting days as well, is where do you draw the line between providing automatically calculating suggestions like replenishment orders to inventory planners versus running processes for some of, let's say, some of the vanilla SKUs, some of the kind of the basic volume ones, just completely automatically letting the system generate purchase orders, replenishment orders, and place them with the supplier. So how do you look at this kind of line between where does the manual process stops and where does the completely automated process begins?
I think that's the customer input. I feel that some customers are really comfortable with the suggestions they're given because they know those SKUs really well and they do not need any manual interaction. Some others maybe they might be high runners, so they need like a quick input. Maybe there's some of those SKUs that they do not have that much in stock and lead times are quite high. So in order to get the best satisfaction to customers, they want to have for some of their SKUs some alerts or some triggers that only for those they will enter perhaps daily or like every other day into the system to review where are those orders being placed to, and then approve them manually. So I believe it's always like from the customer perspective, there's always some that might be a little bit problematic, perhaps from stock perspective, lead times, or also to maintain certain availability for the customers. We always try to advise that at least at the beginning to make sure that everything is working smoothly, to start with some of the SKUs and then start slowly implementing new SKUs until it runs fully automated.
Well, interesting, because you mentioned availability, and it's becoming more and more important. We had the conversation the other day internally in terms of the supply chains these days are no longer kind of smooth and static. The demand, even in historical, yes, it may have been driven by seasonality and maybe some other things, but these days there's a lot of disruption and the volatility of demand is much higher. So how do you have, especially with automated systems, how do you manage the highly volatile and not predictable demand where your history is not always a good predictor of the future? And instead of just simply loading up stock, you want to build some agility. So can you maybe talk a little bit about that?
So, in terms of building some agility, if depend how big the supply chain network is, right? There's some customers that they might have different warehouses across the UK, for example. Some others might have one in the UK and then the other one will be in France. So moving stock across warehouses might be a little bit more difficult. So usually you will always look at what is your past. I think that tends to be a good indicator of how that's going to be the future need. If you have some seasonality, then you will prepare for that possible seasonality. Otherwise, if you have good data, you could easily record if there's like any high strikes in certain months. But you will always, these tools will always give you an estimation of where is your forecast going to. You can always add some adjustments, manual adjustments to the forecast. So I believe planners could, or different teams could look at some SKUs more in isolation. For example, also, especially if they have a new product developments going into the market, those ones will have to be treated differently. But also for repairs, for example, you can also look at the age of a machine to know how you will need that to act quickly. But especially when you have automated systems, you will always also consider how long it takes to rebalance stock from different locations in order to cover that seasonality or that high peak that you might have in 1 month. So unless, I think otherwise it's like very manual, you will have to go area by area to know where you have that stock. But otherwise, if it's a fully automated system, it also takes into consideration everything in terms of where is that stock allocated and how long will it take to move it from one location to another.
Very interesting. And the way that you describe it, and I understand completely how that works. Once everything is up and running, once everything is established, and the colleagues have been trained, and the system and everything is running smoothly, so there's definitely a massive upside in that. How you go about when you at the start of their journey, so where the company does not have automated systems, they do not have sophisticated inventory planning, and they may even, and some of the colleagues may even have resistance to implementation of such system because they might be afraid that automation may replace them and their role. So how you turn the system from, also how you implement the system that starts with nothing into something that people actually use and enjoy using effectively. So where do you begin?
In my previous experience, I've worked with different teams internally in order to do that change management transition. The way I like to approach it is that sometimes a team will be told that we're moving towards this system. Many times, as you said, people might not be like very open to have that up and running. But the way I will always look at it is that I will sit with people and try to go over what are their main pain points, what they struggle with in their day-to-day work, and then give them a comparison on how this system is going to help them and is potentially going to solve or minimize some of the sorry, some of their struggles or their worries that they have at their work. And then I believe that's a good way of having people engage, at least at first, and then from there start working with them on, if this were solved, where will you focus your time? Is there anything else that you think you don't have now that it will be good to have? Because it's with every different team, but I've also found that with supply planning, many times forecast accuracy tends to be very low, and that gives a lot of instability to different teams when, like, within a company, because they're always running behind and they always need to be very active and very quick into working with different teams or suppliers in order to have that cover. So it's a lot of pressure. Whether if you work towards all this data is going to be here, then it's going to be more accurate. So it's also going to help you in all these other areas. So I try to approach it to that way. One scenario that I believe is one of the main problems is data accuracy. Many of these conversations or these updates, for example, when you have conversations with suppliers, all those data changes when things are going to be delivered, if quantities change, that needs to be very manually inputted into their system, and people tend to forget sometimes to add those updates because maybe there's hundreds of SKUs. So data accuracy is something I believe that with any automation, the best way to go about is like, why do we need it? To review the processes. Do we have our processes documented? Because for that transition, we're going to need to do some change management. So we're going to need to teach people we're going from here to there, but if processes are not documented, it's very difficult to do that. And then also, what is not working and what will be a stopper, we should start working on to have that solved before we actually start hands-on on doing any implementation or any automation.
You are listening to Chain Reaction. This podcast is brought to you by Phlox, the leading marketplace for the supply chain and logistics industry. Visit phlox.is to find out how you find the perfect supplier or make your services available to prospective buyers. Thanks for tuning in. Now back to the show.
Now, very, very interesting. I 100% with you on the data accuracy being an absolutely massive problem. If you have garbage in, then you end up having garbage out, and all of those automations will not worth if the paper is written on. But you touched on a couple of challenges. So you mentioned the data. The other one is clarity and transparency and documentation around the processes. What are the others? So I'm sure that it's not all smooth sailing. Is like, what are the other challenges that you typically encounter, either at the beginning where you are convincing people to actually go with the new way of working, or during the transition?
I think managing expectations is a big one. You will communicate that down to the team, but maybe higher management have big high expectations of what that automation is going to do in the short term, which is never in the short term. That takes a while in order to have everyone engaged, process running, and to a point where you want to get. So one is managing expectations from the entire team, from the people doing the actual work to higher management. Then another one is many people have some resistance on using different software. Maybe because they, as you said, maybe they are worried that's gonna, like impact their work, but also because it might take them longer to adjust to a new way of working or a different software. Another one is all the transition from testing. Once you start doing any functional testing in order to start making sure that what you are implementing is actually working, you realize that sometimes people do not understand what are they doing. So it's very difficult to test because they are the experts, but you might not know what you are looking at. So you are not looking at how will that result appear in the new software. Another one is also like tight deadlines. Usually when you do any of these sort of automations or like implementations, deadlines are quite tight, and then there's always different issues that you find when you do testing. So sometimes you might need to go back and rework some things or revisit some processes. Another one is that when you do any type of automation, there's always 100 of ways of doing something. Usually you will want to focus on what's this process, and you want to know what's that process for the majority of the SKUs or the majority of the scenarios, but there always tends to be different alternatives. Oh, but for this we do this other way. For this we do also this other way. So it becomes very difficult to start mapping what the solution is gonna be because there's many ways of doing something. So it's to convince management and to make sure that we have the most used way of doing something for 80% of the time, and then start working on the other scenarios. Some of them, as you said, it can be isolated and done separately until things are up and running and we can find a solution for that.
What are the typical pushbacks that you hear from and let's separate it into well, top management that want to see the results or want to see the magic happening, but not necessarily involved in the day-to-day kind of implementations. And what kind of pushbacks or challenges that you see individually from the colleagues who will be users essentially of the system?
I think like from more higher management, more in ways of having additional things built onto the solution. They, especially will talk about my past experience working within a company. The people doing the work, they were happy with what we were proposing, at least to start with, because they understood that after some time, then they will get more comfortable, and then we could start looking at different solutions. They will push a lot more back into we will start using it, but we also want to make sure that we want to validate what we are doing. So a lot of what is about we're implementing or we're following this new way of working. We want to validate that it's actually working. So can you provide us with some reports? How can we make sure that we are not leaving anything left? Because we had all these other manual processes, but we actually want to make sure that nothing is left. And from higher management, it will be more on why is this adoption taking this long? Why cannot we have these other things integrated? So it's like one are focusing more like quick adoption and having more functionalities, and the team is a lot more worried on we're starting doing it, but how can we make sure that we're not leaving anything left, and tomorrow we're going to have so many issues that we're not going to be able to do our job because we need to go back and fix everything that your new solution has caused us. So I think those are the main two differences that I see a lot.
I know exactly what it feels like. And one of the big problems, and you touched on that, but I'd like to kind of get a bit deeper, is the quality of data. And very often, especially in automated setup, also there are various interfaces that needed to be built with the client system, so they have automatically gets updated. So what kind of challenges do you see in terms of integrating, especially with legacy systems, that might not be very open to effective integrations? And how do you make sure that, to your earlier point, how do you make sure that nothing is left behind, nothing is being overlooked or lost in the process?
So, on my previous experience implementing EDI, so we were going through a transition that we were implementing EDI with the manufacturing sites. So once there was any sort of, there was mostly three types of transactions: inbounds into the warehouse, outbound, so anything they were shipping out, or any production that was happening on the site. All that, once that was completed, we'll get some messages into SAP, and it will automatically create the production and build from all the components, build the finished good, or they will create the outbound, inbound orders into SAP and have things closed. So the main thing that we were seeing with that is, first, we were going from we've been using some manually reporting from the sites to us. Now we're changing that completely, because we're not really going to need those reports anymore. People is not going to have to review them daily. So we're going to have everything as it happens. Well, the day after, it will be visible in our systems. When they were still sending those reports, we saw discrepancies between what those reports were sent with and what the EDI was communicating in terms of material consumption, some amount of production that was creating out of those components, or even the amount of goods that were received or shipped out. So that data accuracy, it was about sitting like very closely with the manufacturing plants, understand how they were reporting that data, because sometimes they were not even using their ERP systems to give us some reporting. They were many times doing that manually. So it was from moving from that solution of, we now need to start reviewing everything that you have in your ERP that is accurate with what we have in our ERP. And fortunately, there's the inventory teams or supply chain teams, they look very closely into how much excess is held, and they do like constant audits. So the accuracy of that data, at least to validate, is constantly reviewed. But it's very difficult. I think like sometimes the main challenge is when a customer or within a company, you want to have certain feature that will require how old are your machines, for example, right? Or they want certain feature that they need to give us data in order for that automation to happen, or for certain calculations to happen, but they do not have that data in record, or they don't know where they have in their ERP that data in record. So I think that's the main challenge. Is held somewhere, but is not known like how accurate it is, especially if people have to manually maintain that. For example, bill of materials, many times those are maintained manually, or some teams, they maintain them like monthly. They will load some Excel files to have that updated in the ERP, but then have they been maintaining it constantly? Are we looking at all data?
So how do you, because you did mention that there's a difference between obviously kind of the middle management and the senior management in terms of one wants stability and the other one wants speed. How you balance the two? How do you balance the kind of the accuracy, and what you've described is actually looks like quite a lot of manual, repetitive, careful processes versus the senior management that says, come on guys, chop chop, I want to have it working tomorrow?
It's a way of making people accountable. We can do this, we're at this stage, but now we need your input, because in any part of automation, whether it's within a company or like you are working with a customer to do an integration, there's a lot of teams that need to be working together. For example, within supply chain, if you want to do any automation for planning or for inventory, it will impact planning, transport, customer service. It will impact the entire supply chain. So it's about bringing all those teams together, having a representative on those calls, and being very vocal on what do we need in order to achieve that. And then make someone accountable for collecting that data or making people work together. So I think people want to get to a success in whether like any automation implementation you're doing, and people is willing to work together. But the important thing is to have the right people engaged from the beginning and make people accountable.
Right. That we've touched on quite a few challenges, and that was a very interesting kind of conversation. And I like asking colleagues at the end kind of this kind of question. So the challenges that you've highlighted, and imagine that you had a magic wand and you can just wave it, and then one problem will get solved instantly. What would that problem be that will help you or kind of or drag you back on a daily basis? What is one thing that you would love to get rid of?
I think, like as I said, from everyone to be aligned on what the want is and how to get there, and work together in order to get to that success. In order to, I think like sometimes not everyone can be always in the calls. So just for everyone to be aligned from the very beginning on what are we working towards. I think that will be like a very ideal because that, I believe, is where many of that resistance is coming from.
Interesting. Yeah. No, I completely understand what you're saying. Is yeah, as the saying goes, if there is a will, there is a way. When people actually, if they see common goal and if they all aspire to get it, they'll find a way of getting there together without slowing it down or sabotaging anything or just simply rolling the eyes and doing nothing. So, and unfortunately, I've seen those happening. So fascinating. Thank you. Thanks very much, Rosana, for joining our conversation today and for sharing your insights. It's been a real pleasure.
Thank you so much.
And
Thank you so
to
much for
everyone
having me.
watching and listening, yes, thank you, thank you. And everyone who's still staying with us and listening, please, thank you very much for your attention. And I hope you found that discussion valuable. And I look forward to meeting you again in another episode of Chain Reaction Podcast. Speak to you soon. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to Chain Reaction. We hope you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to like and subscribe. If you have a story or insights to share from your sector, we'd love to hear from you. Simply reach out to us through the links in the description. See you next time.